He holds a PhD in climate change. He is an expert in carbon and climate footprints with expertise in carbon, GHG inventory, mitigation and management, air quality impact modeling, spatial and temporal risk analytics, climate change impact and adaptation, sustainability and resilience, meteorology, and the likes of them. He has been practicing in Canada for the past 20 years, and he is currently helping organizations with emission quantification. Our second contributor at today's afternoon session is Dr. Ola Akinshipe. He holds a PhD in air quality and chemical technology. He is a strategist, environmental and climate change specialist with multidisciplinary background in environmental, chemical technology, and microbiology. He has passion for research and consulting on projects centered on climate change and environmental impacts. He has worked for about 12 years now, conducting series of environmental related studies in South Africa. He is also an expert on impact assessments, risk assessments and modeling, and emission quantification. He has worked on several projects in South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, and the likes of it. He specializes also in air quality and climate change. You are welcome, Dr. Ola, to today's event. Also, another contributor that we have during this event is Dr. Mrs. Comfort Asokoro Ogaji, who is the GMD CEO of Richflood Group. She holds a PhD in strategic management, and she has been continuously working on global climate crisis, business sustainability strategies, and competitive advantage, focusing on how African investors and organizations can achieve the sustainable development goals. As of 2020, she has coordinated and performed oversight duty on approximately 200 investment projects in Africa, ensuring environmental and sustainability considerations are incorporated in project planning all through operational and decommissioning phases. Right about now, I would like to invite Dr. Samuel Kaharabata for his contribution. Over to you, Dr. Samuel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. For those who are in North America, good morning. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Comfort Asokoro Ogaji of Richflood for inviting me to speak to you on topics regarding emission inventories and essentially what corporations need to know. I am greatly honored to be speaking here today and being able to share some of my insights with you. As I was being introduced, I just want to add a little extra aspects of myself. I'm a climate risk consultant, and I translate climate science for organizations in order for them to reduce the risks posed by climate change and also to improve their resilience and sustainability in face of climate change. My approach is really to create innovative and leading edge solutions for my clients. And these novel analytics, I normally publish in journals so that we advance the science related to climate change. My expertise spans greenhouse gas emissions or transitional assessments and management to the physical risks management, which involves assessing impact, adaptation, and extreme events. This work has taken me to many sectors or industries, and this includes agriculture, forestry, energy, which is oil and gas, oil sands here in Canada, mining, power generation, transportation, which includes both land and marine transportation, waste management, insurance, finance, and government, and our communities in general. A lot of my earlier work has contributed to Canada's agriculture sector's reporting requirements of our national greenhouse gas inventory to the UN FCC. And more recently, I'm looking at climate shocks and how they propagate through your supply chain. It allows us to investigate the knowns as well as to discover the unknown risks and consequences, and thereby seek opportunities where we can mitigate these things. I also advocate for stronger climate action whenever I can, and you can find many of my contributions on climate change science on ResearchGate, as well as orchid.org. So what can I say about emission inventories and what corporations need to know? What I will briefly cover will be at a fairly high level, and many of you may be already familiar with what I will share. So what do we want to do? Environmental regulations, well, why do we want to do it? So essentially it's because there are a number of reasons, and there are environmental regulations of a country or a state within that country, and you need to comply with those regulations. And there are others such as other stakeholders, such as lenders, investors, shareholder requirements, and you need to meet their requirements. And for investors, they also want to know about the environmental and social and governance performances of the assets that they have invested in. So in order to meet those requirements, you also need to be able to assess your carbon footprint and your environmental footprint. And then this leads us into disclosure reporting. And we need to, as many of you are aware, with the TCFD requirements from the Financial Stability Board, we need to disclose the risks and opportunities posed by climate change. And this all supports resiliency and sustainability goals of a company that you are assisting. We would also need to conduct stress testing. So one of the reasons why we were doing these assessments is that we want to be able to conduct some stress testing of a company's operations through maybe scenario analysis, what if scenarios. We look at future energy mix and future demand. And we also look at future economic trends and directions. We want to be able to see how are we performing given these future scenarios, and can we find some weak points or some areas where we can mitigate. The other thing is a country's commitment to meeting the Paris Agreement for reducing emissions so as to limit the global warming to below 2 degrees and preferably below 1.5 degrees before previous industrial levels. And this avoids some catastrophic climate change impacts. And I'm sure that in Nigeria and neighboring countries, you're already experiencing these extreme events, such as short duration rainfalls that are very extreme that lead to flooding, extreme heat, as well as prolonged droughts. And this has severe economic and social consequences. So some of these are the reasons why we want to do this. Now, how do we do it? So first, what I would encourage is to be collaborative and to connect with others in your industry so that you can share lessons learned, tips on how you're doing it, and as well as mutually supporting one another through this exercise. Now, there are a number of methodologies that are available, and one can find them online, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. And these methodologies help you on your path to conducting carbon assessments and even environmental footprint assessments. So for one is the ISO 14064 protocol. And another one is the IPCC inventory methodology. And during the introduction, we heard about the EPA methodology. There's also the greenhouse gas protocol methodology from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Organization. And this helps organizations, companies, as well as governments and community-based emission inventories. And all of these give guidance on direct and indirect emissions, and those related to your supply chain emissions. And they also cover emissions that are falling under scopes 1, 2, and 3. And we can go to these sites to understand what these scopes all mean. And inventories are typically made using emission factors for the fossil fuel used by an organization. And they also cover biogenic emission sources such as solid waste and wastewater and agriculture. And then land use change and forestry-based emissions. Some of these key emission sources would be direct emissions from power generation, mining, oil and gas, industry, transportation, and waste management. And then you have your indirect emissions, which would be from your electricity or energy consumption. There's commercial activities, and then there's transboundary transportation, such as air, rail, and marine, that are outside of your jurisdiction, that are coming in and out. Now, how do we mitigate? So once we establish a baseline, an emission footprint for a given year, you can then start to find areas where we can target energy, solar, wind, what have you. And then for fixing leaks, especially this is important in the oil and gas industry, to eliminate fugitive emissions. So, as well as mining, there's a lot of fugitive emissions, and if we can contain those, then we're significantly reducing our emissions. And then there's reducing wastage. We can also change operating activities, how we are doing our day-to-day operation for a given company or organization. We can change those so that we reduce our environmental and carbon footprint. We can also change our behavior with regard to that, and then reduce our consumption of materials. Governments can then also enact new legislation and regulation, as well as policies, to help us meet those reduction targets. What do we do then after we've started retargeting reductions and mitigating those emissions? So then what we do is we monitor and track progress. And we need to annually measure or conduct inventories to monitor progress. And then we conduct annual inventories. So we go back into conducting our assessments. We report on this, and then we make adjustments based on our progress or lack of progress. And we also disclose this. So inventories through measurements, for example, we can measure emissions from our stacks, direct emissions, or we can use simply emission factors for other kinds of sources. So there's different ways of conducting monitoring and measuring and tracking our progress. What I'd like to leave with you with my closing remark is that all of this is an iterative process. So we iterate through the inventory, we mitigate, we monitor, then we adjust what we see, and then we start back again, we do our inventory, and we iterate through this. So I want to stop here and thank you for your time, and I'll pass it on to Dr. Ola.